Welcome to Improv Your Parenting, the art of turning parenting into playing. Today we're joined by Joe Bill. Joe is widely regarded as one of the best teachers of scenic, long-form, duo improvisation, and improvised storytelling in North America today. He's one of the founding members of Annoyance Theater Chicago, where for 12 years he performed in and or directed more than 60 different shows. He's the director and creator of Story Chain, a virtual and now sometimes live 90-minute international story sharing event that he developed in 2020 during the pandemic. He was the director of corporate training at I.O. Chicago for 15 years and started training and performing there in 1985. He was a guest artist in residence at the Second City Training Center and Conservatory, where he taught intensives in duo improvisation and improvisation for actors for 10 years. Joe is one half of the original improvised mono-scene, which used to be called Real Time, Bassprov group with Mark Sutton, and has been touring all over the world teaching, directing, and improvising with several other amazing duo partners like Patty Stiles, Jill Bernard, Stacey Halal, Lee White, Dave Rosowski, and Heather Urquhart, all in different original formats and styles. Joe has taught and performed on every continent on Earth except Antarctica, which remains on his bucket list. Today, we're lucky to have Joe Bill with us to talk about using improv in your parenting. So, Joe, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate having you.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
I always start these conversations with one question: what is your interaction with kids, and what role does improv play in that interaction?
First and foremost, it's just as a parent, and my parenting situation is, there's a complexity to it. I have two daughters. I'm in Chicago. I have one daughter in Chicago, and another in South Africa. And so right away, that sounds like the beginning of an improv proposition. I don't do my interaction with other kids. My daughter in Chicago, who I'm geographically closer to, is 19. So interacting with parents and other kids happened mostly as, we were getting her through grade school and stuff. And I'm notoriously not a great person to have in your kids' improv show, usually because every once in a while I'll do a kid show, but I have to prepare to empty my vault of curse words for a month before I walk on stage. I'm from a family that uses vulgarity to emphasize disorder and really anything. For me, the first thing that occurred when we were talking about getting together was the idea that your children are ultimately your best improv teachers. I've been an improviser. I first learned improv. Gosh, now I have to do math. Sorry, this might take a minute. More than 40 years. Yeah, more than 45, less than 50 years ago. But I think because as soon as you have a kid, at least for me, you're aware of how you're listening. And the type of improvisation that I do the most and that I'm the most known for is like scenic two-person improvisation. We've always known that listening's important, but when all of a sudden there's just something biologically elevated in your brain and body that has you listen in a way that at its core is about understanding, to me, that was the first revelation I had about improvisation and parenting.
So tell me about that when your daughters were babies and you were recognizing, actually, they are teaching me. How did that come about? And when did you develop that sort of understanding of, oh, this is actually good for me?
I mean, I can't remember the exact day, but I think any parent who's living with their kid in their first 6 years, you learn that there's all different types of crying. So, hungry cry, angry cry, afraid cry, want to be close cry, cataloging the different cries and their different frequencies. You start to get almost like a preview of your kid's disposition and personality based on the way that they cry.
Yeah.
Part of me feels there's just an innate thing in our brain because we're animals that we're pre-programmed to have whatever parenting instincts exists in our generational gene pool that gets activated. As you're learning more about them, you're learning more about yourself and what sense you're making of their cries and what cries you're more innately comfortable with, and then what cries are more anxiety inducing. And so for some parents, the thing that comes to mind is the whole notion of let them learn self-soothing.
Mhm.
Are you co-sleeping? Are you putting them in a room? If they're crying, how long before you go in? I'm a founder of Annoyance Theater in Chicago. One of our foundational rules in improvisation that put us on the map is the best way to take care of your scene partner is to take care of yourself first. And so relative to self-soothing, when you're going through that first 6 months and your kid is crying and you know it's a distress cry or need to be with you cry or need to be close to you cry, the way that you're aware of that or how patient you are before you go in there or the need to immediately go in there, that tells you something about yourself. I should also mention I've been in and out of therapy for 30 something years. So it's in that realm. In an improv scene, the more you learn about the other character, the more you learn about yourself as the scene unfolds, as the play unfolds. Does that make sense? The connection to childhood, certain dispositions, circumstances, relational, emotional things on stage, I'm very comfortable with. Certain relational things on stage, depending on the partner with whom I'm playing, that I either have to be more careful or I say, oh, this is a scene where I have to be vulnerable in a way that's not exactly in my wheelhouse. For me, I think that relates to the way that I learned to listen when both my daughters were introduced to the world.
So you're taking the offer and you've already identified the variants of offers that could be available, and chances are there will be other ones added. But you're taking the offer and you're saying, what do I do with this particular offer? This kind of cry can have this outcome. How do I respond to that outcome? How do I respond to that offer? And what outcome does that create? And then you get to choose your responses based on whatever outcome you think you can generate.
I mean, yeah, that's a real key nuance. And here comes deep cut improv
Please,
nerd.
yeah.
Part of it is tied to potential outcome, but part of it is just in the moment without regard to outcome at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you don't know what it's going to be. And,
Yeah.
you know, part of the thing that has me travel the world as an improv instructor is I'm a neuroscience nerd. And so I study the behavioral neuroscience of self-consciousness. A metaphor I use when I teach, and frankly, when I'm training corporate people as well, is in each of our brains, we have an engineer and a jazz musician.
Mhm.
Relative to what you just said, the engineer is definitely more interested in outcome with a tip of the hat to process to yield outcome. Whereas the jazz musician is just in the moment and how am I responsive to what's here rather than reacting to what's here?
Mhm.
Even if what's here might put us more in the emotional realm of anxiety or panic or fear of the unknown, how can you just be responsive to what's here right now, like organically with the part of you that's already tied to that? Because you're talking about a little human that's partly made of you.
And that needs you.
And then it's like, we're all in improv and comedy for a reason. All of us didn't get something we needed when we were kids.
Which is why we're in therapy. Yeah.
Which is also why we're in therapy. But like, I wasn't even aware, you know, of that meta observation until much later. It's like, you know, I got everything I needed. I had a shelter, a roof over my head. I had clothes. I had food in my mouth, and I'm happy for it, is my father's voice. But we'll talk about the hearing the different type of cries and have that activate an emotional part inside of you. For me, some of that were pieces of emotional truths in me that I had just repressed because, you know, Irish Catholic upbringing or something.
Yeah. So as you're experiencing these emotions inside and your baby is crying in the other room and stuff is coming up, and you're kind of saying, okay, what do I do now with this and with that? And so how has improv kind of helped you figure that out?
Yes, even at that point, because now comes the question, to what degree do I trust you to be okay?
Yeah.
So if I'm in an improv scene and maybe somebody's going off the rails of what we had established early in the scene, my experience has taught me I can try to avert that or interrupt that, or I can have curiosity within my judgment that this might not be great. And for me, usually the best course of action is just to pause, take a breath, and see what's going to come out of that person. And now it's like, oh, okay, this is going to be something we're going to have to deal with. Let's hear the entirety of what we have to deal with and see if we can deal with it. I'm a little bit OCD, so I knew one of the first cries I learned was dirty diaper. I never mind changing diapers and cleaning up a kid because it just plays into that. I love washing dishes. I love folding laundry. So cleaning a dirty butt is like, yeah,
right
let's
up
go.
there.
Yeah. I don't have to elaborate on the metaphor where it goes to an
Yeah.
improv scene.
I love it. As your daughters were getting older and moving beyond the cry into interaction through activity and words, what changed in the way that you were able to approach those interactions, those demands, the offers they were giving you?
Well, so now here's where there's a different split. My ex-wife was South African, and so she and my daughter and her son, my stepson, they moved back to South Africa when my daughter was 6 months old.
Okay.
And so we had a challenging relationship on a lot of levels. It happened everything happened very quickly. It was whimsical, the South African accent. Oh, so cute. I've had to parent from a distance. So my youngest daughter's now 11. And it's still with curiosity and love. With my daughter Angie in Chicago, some of it starts to become about being interested in what lights her up.
Yeah.
Since I have two daughters, my parenting goal early on is to teach them about their brains, the way that they're aware, and to have agency. Because I feel like to feel loved, if we're talking about outcome goals, how do we do that? It seemed to me that the way to do that was to be aware of what their interests were, their passions were, what could keep them engaged with me as an older animal and they're a younger animal. What that manifested in with my daughter Angie was puzzles. We would work puzzles and we had like 12 blocks and they kind of go in a square and you can turn them different ways and they make different animals. And so the first observation was just showing her the different animals that could be there. So showing her what's the baseline here? What is this thing we're dealing with? And then seeing after we'd make the sheep, if she had an idea about like, let's make the dog. And so for me, had her feel supported in making that simple initiation and receiving that initiation with love and enthusiasm and curiosity, my theory was if I can model collaboration with her in a way that is inside of this awareness that like she knows I'm her dad, she knows that there's this innate status thing going on, but if she can initiate and I can follow sometimes,
They love
me,
that.
that's the bedrock of my parenting philosophy. I'm still the dad, I still have to be a dad, but there has to be some type of co-authorship that's introduced early so that that child can develop a pattern of trust in you to bring to you, to initiate with you conversations or actions or whatever, so that you can then yes and them, so that you can be, I hear you, I see you, yes, let's do that, or I hear you, I see you, let's talk about that.
So then as they aged, was that something that they were able to build off of and increase their agency, their capability, their interaction with you through that initial allowing them that space to lead?
Yeah, it's interesting because my oldest daughter, like her mother and I were never married, which is why we're still very good friends. And she married a friend of mine and they have a little boy. Her mom is on television and her stepdad and I did improv together. So we're all theater people.
Wow. Yeah.
We're all theater people. And, of course, in my brain, I'm like, I hope she just chooses improv to be part of her growing up process. We had her in an improv class, improv for kids at Second City. As she got through high school, she has a little bit of social anxiety issues. She's definitely more of an introvert. And this theater kid that we raised had the agency to say, I'm going to be an engineer.
Nice.
And so Okay, okay. Engineer's good. Is that what, way to start with puzzles. So, then that grew into her being aware of her own anxiety, her being aware of, even in a neurodiverse way, like her mother and I both kind of lie on the anxiety spectrum a little bit.
Mhm.
Her recognizing that and her anxiety within a social situation. She started college as an engineer and said, I want to study engineering with a minor in education so I can teach other young women to take over a male dominated industry. I'm like, well,
Awesome.
okay,
Yeah, cool.
let's do that then. She took too many credits her first semester, so she needed a little mentor. She took 19 credits, which
That's ambitious.
but she's definitely a go after it type of person. And she just
Yeah,
learned the lesson of we all have a finite pool of energy reserve.
yeah,
And so she butted up against that. She's taken a flex semester off and felt like the achievement part of her brain felt like she failed. I'm like, no, 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 no,
oh,
no. I
yeah,
didn't learn self-care and boundaries and emotional healthy stuff until I was well into my 40s, if not 50. And
yeah,
so that she showed that awareness, I think, is just another level of agency that, like, I don't think I'm responsible for it, but her pattern of communicating with both of us as parents,
uh-huh,
especially in the realm of communicate your awareness, your meta awareness, even, right? Your awareness of your own emotions,
yeah,
communicate that so that you know that you're not alone in experiencing this stuff that I was alone in
yeah.
experiencing when I was growing up.
One of the things I really appreciate about that is that it was through that development of self-realization, that sense of self in relation to others, that she was able to see that this was too much. And I need to step back from this thing. And maybe it was yeah, you don't want to necessarily take responsibility for it or ownership of it. Maybe it was the ability to work with her over her growing up time that gave her that sense of superior perception, but not just of body, but of mind.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And then also, she was sitting and stewing a little bit just in the idea of being defeated. Like she lost, I'm defeated, I
Yeah,
failed.
yeah,
And then because we're already in process, we already have flow of conversation. It's a very important lesson for a 18, 19-year-old to learn to reframe disappointment, to
yes,
reframe failure. I think failure is gifts, and there's no such thing as failure. There's no such thing as the wrong note, only the next note. I think that it's lovely and it's also trite. It can be
yeah.
trite when you're dealing with the emotions of a hormonally charged being that's partly your psyche.
And they've just gone through something hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard. And I get it. What's the end goal? The end goal is we're all going to have failures in life. We're all going to have goals that we aim for and then don't accomplish. And
Mhm.
so now what? It's not falling down, it's getting back up,
Yeah.
however you want to frame it. For me to see her be able to accept that, to sit with it for herself, to
Mhm.
deal with her own judgment, her own sense of ambition, her own sense of wanting to achieve. There's nothing I can say. There's nothing her mother or stepfather can say to her. She
Yeah.
has to cope with that herself. And you hope that it's in some type of healthy way. And that's when parenting goes into like a Las Vegas bookmaker proposition. I hope I placed the right bet here.
Did you do a lot of play with your daughters as they were growing up? Did you bring improv, whether you called it that or not, into the parenting interaction that you
Yeah.
had?
Yeah. Especially with my South African daughter. I haven't seen her in person since a couple of years before COVID.
Wow.
So we're on FaceTime. And so really it's about doing peas in the pod scene.
Yeah.
It's about like match her energy, what she interested in, follow along. Both my daughters they're very visual. They both draw cartoons. They both,
Oh,
design stuff. And
mhm.
I'm not that much of a visual type person, but they both taught me to draw. With Angie, we would have a sketch pad. She loved Project Runway. So she made me get us both sketch pads. And so whenever they would have an assignment to design something, I mean, she's 5 or 6 years old. Daddy, let's design a dress. Like, all right,
Cool.
awesome. Let's design a dress. And then it's like, okay, do you design something dumb or make it your best effort? And every time I designed a dress with her, I would be like, do I do a bit or do I try to
What'd
make
you
it
decide?
more times than not? I tried to make an honest attempt at partly because I was fascinated that at 5 or 6 years old, she could draw a more impressive version of the challenge than I could, earnestly trying. I think a lot of parents come up against the question, if we're playing checkers, do I let the kid win? Or do I beat him? And I think some of that just is determined by your genetic, your generational genealogy. I don't believe there's a right way. It's sort of like passing down the history of process. With my daughter Grace in South Africa, some of it was her designing stuff. What color hair should she have? What color dress? What color eyes? What do you think now? She's more naturally inclined to declare the next thing. So she's kind of got that agency, or at least the beginning of it, intact. And because she had the tools to design, and it's also technologically beyond, but to have her ask my opinion sometimes before or sometimes after she would make a choice. For me, it's like learning what games can we play on FaceTime that can just help me learn her. And I'm also aware I'm trying to finish writing a book. Writing a book's easy. Finishing writing a book,
Almost impossible.
You've done a couple of them, so I bow down. One of the things I talk about in the book, as improv applies to life, is in theatrical improvisation, we tend to present that in 3 different buckets. One is games, the other stories, and the other scenes. And so when I'm dealing with corporate people, or I'm doing executive coaching, or even with my daughters, I'm very aware of, are we leading with game? Are we leading with scene? Are we leading with story? And in organically engaging my kids, I guess my innate awareness of that is like, when I follow them, I tend to follow them in the direction I perceive that we're in. So if we're in story, I will agree and augment in the direction of story. If we're in game, I will agree and augment in the direction of game. If we're in scene, if we're in relationship, then it's, all 3 have a slightly different type of listening as I teach it. And so I'm very aware of that.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm recognizing from what you've been saying is there's very little of, this is what I want in these interactions that has come out from this conversation. Now, I don't know that that's not there, but I'm not hearing it. It's very much, where are they? What are they leading with? How do I augment, build, heighten that?
Yes. As parenthetically squared by, I know who I am in the scene.
Yeah.
So when improvisers are playing scenes, my observation over the years has been, when the improviser doesn't know who they are as character, the scene's going to devolve very quickly into a whole lot of like premises and circumstances and what this should be about.
Exactly, because nobody's holding on to anything.
Yeah, nobody's holding on. It's like my duo partner, Mark Sutton, has maybe the best note at improv, which is, we have to play the scene that's here, not the scene that we want to be here. And even Second City has tried to claim that. One of my campaigns is to give Mark the credit due, because he developed that idea out of studying like survivalists and like what makes people, what are people that equipped with that give them the best chance of survival in a survival situation, in the darkness, in being lost. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's part of parenting. Like, you're always going to be partly lost. Even now, 19 years into my own, like, part of it is like, I don't know.
I think that's a really important point to make, is that that's okay.
Yeah. Here's another dark, pithy thing. I'm a cancer survivor, and I had this idea before, but after going through cancer and chemo, and I'm 2 years past, and so far, knock on wood, cancer free, somebody, it might even be Oscar Wilde, the quote is, to know how to die is to know how to live.
Mm.
To know how to fail is to know how to succeed. I've died so many times in so many ways on stage in my 40 whatever years of it. That lesson of what's gone off the rails, what is it? Be right here. All right, let's jump on the surfboard and see where we go.
Yeah.
And then it gets kind of Buddhist, right? Let's accept what's here and not resist
Mhm.
what's here. So even if I fail to succeed in some definition of success, I at least learn. I have one more level up of learning that I can apply somewhere else. And I believe my doing that and learning that lesson in improvisation for sure informs my intuition as I've parented. If your kids are natural mirrors, so if you're giving them anxiety, they're just going to give you anxiety back. They are observing how is my dad in the realm of the unknown? Okay, at a loss for knowing how to feel, but feeling chaos inside of me. What's my dad acting like? Maybe I can mirror that. It's just a wager, isn't it? I'll bet that's going to be good.
Because they have no idea. Yeah. And they have no experience with it. This is the one path that they've seen done. So it's like, okay, let me try that.
Yeah, that's what I did not get from my parents. My dad was New York, Irish, German, Catholic. Everybody's after you. You got to
Oh, wow.
attack life before life attacks you. He would never frame it as anxiety, but it's that hypervigilant New York, Notre Dame football player energy. My mom suffered with a bunch of mental illnesses and was just like this collection of obsessive behaviors that was just like soothing coping mechanisms. But it was obvious to me as a child. It's like, oh, I guess mom likes vacuuming the same piece of carpeting for a long time.
Yeah.
I'll bet it's clean.
Was there much play in your growing up?
My dad was sports obsessed, so he had to play sports all year round. My mom
Like
was
play with you? Was there any play with you?
no, he coached us.
Yeah.
And so I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and to some degree, all of us are teachers and coaches, even in
Oh,
different walks of life. So in the way that he played with us was from a position of status and instruction. The one thing he would do in Reader's Digest, the little magazine,
yeah.
there's a game called It Pays to Enrich Your Word Power. And it's basically a multiple choice quiz. You're given a word and you're given 4 options and like, what does this word mean? And so from my earliest memory, to me, that's the greatest thing. That might have been the greatest gift he gave me where play might be concerned. He would always beat me until one day in high school, I beat him. I got 20 and he got 19. And so to me, I think that can map over my desire to work puzzles with my daughter. He wanted me to have a good vocabulary, though he was a Notre Dame football player and he was an English and philosophy major.
Uh-huh.
I think he valued the capacity to use words effectively. Whether that was something he recognized might be useful to me or just passing on that value to me, I don't know. That's what comes to mind with my dad. My mom was fairly detached. They're both deceased now. She had dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality, and all this. So as a kid, you observe that. And the way that I engaged with that was innately, intuitively, something just to meet her where she is. Like whatever version of mom is here, all right, let's do that.
Because that was the only choice you had, right? Yeah.
I mean, as you and I observe it, there's plenty of stuff I dissociated from and repressed and whatever, or withdrawed from. My dad also had, my dad ruled the house with the threat of violence. So I knew how to okay, it'd be better if I didn't get hit. So I knew how to withdraw from that and not challenge that. But with my mom, you and I probably have, is it nature or nurture? We were born with the brains we're born with. And so our moms exhibit a variety of behaviors. So what is it that makes us just naturally, well, I'll play that? Is that taught or are we born with that?
I have no clue.
And no, I don't either. I wish I knew. If we knew, we'd be rich.
Right? So that sounds like when you then had kids, you weren't going to be doing those things. Like what was you modeled to you?
100%.
What then allowed you to focus on here's the parent I want to be and how I'm going to interact with my kids.
When I arrived in Chicago, I knew a whole lot more about what I didn't want to be and who I didn't want to be than who I did want to be.
Yeah.
Going through cancer, I wrote a solo show called Surviving Consciousness, Lessons Learned from Cancer, LSD, and Michael Jordan. It's a storytelling show. One of the things I talk about was I learned in arriving to Chicago to forward a game of identity that I had begun in high school, which is to build a carnival on top of the trauma.
Yeah.
And my personality was a carnival made up of my mom, partly made up of my dad, partly made up of my reactions to my mom and my dad.
Yeah.
And then as I could manifest, I learned very early on, I could make people laugh. I could keep bullies from beating me up by making greater fun of myself than they could. As a parent, that instinct crossed into my parenting thing. Like I knew more about how I didn't want to parent than how I did want to parent. And it's, you're responsible for a little you having far more information about the don't than the do equals a beginning improv student focusing on the improv rules
Exactly.
to such a degree that it's impossible to do good improv.
Oh.
So at least I was aware of that.
Exactly. But you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And I think my very first therapist, I was with him for 10 years. And really, the greatest thing I learned from him was this idea that children concern themselves with what they can get, teenagers concern themselves with what they can prove, and adults concern themselves with what they can give.
Mhm.
And so I was aware that I was so passionately against the program that I was raised in that I grew up like proving and, flying the birds, especially at my dad a lot.
Yeah.
I didn't want to parent from a place of proving anything to anybody. I wanted to be in a place of giving, both to my daughters and to the mothers of my daughters. And then by extension, my stepson, my daughter's little brother. Like, how can I be giving and then forgive myself when I fall short of that?
Yeah. And how do you forgive yourself when you fall short? Of course, you're going to,
With
right?
great difficulty, Jeremy.
Yeah,
So
because every parent's going to experience that. So what does that look like?
it looks like Buddhism. It looks like acceptance.
Yeah.
It looks like acceptance. It looks like ownership. And it looks like the vulnerability to admit that, you were wrong or you felt short or you could have done better. Because the pain of that is far less. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way. It's far less than the pain of letting something fester, not apologizing, not owning up, not being aware because you feel threatened or unsafe with co-parenting situations.
Yeah.
Or, even in my oldest daughter's mother and I, she's from South America, she's Latina. And we noticed in grade school that some parents were just traditional, white people who could be judgmental towards her. And I was completely blind to that or unaware, she was in that situation. And at the same time that my daughter's mother was experiencing this type of judgment, this type of negativity, this type of, disinvitation into the norm of parenting world that goes along with that, I was experiencing this idea that like all of these people are out of their freaking minds and I would never parent this way. And so we both felt somewhat disenfranchised from the other parents and the way that they did things. And that in a way, until we communicated with each other about that had us feeling a sense of aloneness that could have us be not our best with each other. But once we communicated that idea of like, here's what I'm picking up from these parents. Here's what I'm picking up from these parents. Oh, we both have a negative impression of that. The assumption is that we should be doing things in a different way than what we're doing them. But from our earliest days, and I'll bet most parents go through this, you have a baby and there's a bunch of people who are more than willing to tell you what to do, what book to read, what podcast to listen to. And that's an option. I think because we're theater people, and her mother's a very good actor and very, a large emotional capacity, like more than what I have. And we decided, even when she was pregnant, we knew this was not going to be a traditional relationship. Let's focus on co-parenting and let's make our relationship about being the best co-parents we can be.
Nice.
And I think because we unburdened ourselves from the expectation, the societal expectation that we should be married, we saw that that's not what our reality was. We chose this path, and so far 19 years in seems pretty good. We both agreed to not write any books until our daughter is 30.
Just for everybody's protection.
Yeah, but it's only now at 19 am I starting to see hints in the way she looks at me that, yeah, something inside of her knows that I'm an idiot. But we have a very loving and a trusting relationship. And I believe, between 18 and 25, all kids need to try reacting to what they disapprove of in terms of their parents' process. And so even that doesn't unnerve me. It's, again, my goal is have agency. You have agency. You're, part of one dark part of parenting is teaching them they're going to be okay when you're gone. And I believe that for me, I can introduce them to that idea in ways that aren't literal, but by fostering their sense of agency, their sense of worth, their sense that their ideas are valuable. Sometimes life is scary and sometimes life is beautiful, and it's both at the same time.
You have taken the opposite approach from your dad in terms of allowing that vulnerability, both with your co-parenting relationship of this isn't going to be the way everybody else does it, and that's okay. And then with your daughters of, sometimes I'm wrong and I'm going to admit that.
And sometimes I get called out. Yeah, I mean, my oldest daughter is definitely an introvert, but with me, she will speak her mind. I need more from you in this area, Dad. Her emotional intelligence is off the chart. I mean, when I got me at 19, she's as deep as the ocean and I was a bird bath.
It's fascinating. Could you attribute any of that? I mean, obviously there's genetics involved to growing up around all this artistry, all this creativity, all of these people being able to play in all these different spaces and forms.
I think it would seem accurate to attribute some of it. How to measure it, I don't know.
No,
and it's like the engineer part of my parents' generations, there's certain measurables that you're accountable to get your kids to. That's very goal focused, and whatever process gets you to the goal is fine. For me, it's a different set of measurables, which tend to be process focused, with the hope that you can be a good improv partner and father character and co-parent character to be an acceptance of this human's journey and whatever they discover. And as each year goes by, there's less and less influence you can wield, or maybe it's not less and less. There's different types of influences you can wield at different points.
Yeah.
And like anything, it's remembering as a parent, what you control is so small. And teaching them that is a different proposition at different stages of their life, right?
Yeah. I really like the process focus rather than the outcome. It allows you to play in the space and see what happens rather than be like, we have to have doctor at the end of this.
Yeah. And then you can save the goal teachings because goal brain is ruled by anxiety and fear. And so like a goal example is stop, look both ways again, grab my hand. Now let's cross the street. Keep looking both ways as you cross the street. If at a super early age, you're giving simple instructions that are definitively outcome based, once they know that pattern, then it's turning that pattern into song. And there you have the childhood version of Meisner, in my opinion. Shout out to our acting nerds.
I love that. I come back to this with a lot of people I'm talking to now, and it seems to be a consistent theme, is you're setting the safety framework, and then you're playing whatever you want within that controlled space. So we're not running into the street, but we can do character, we can do song, we can do dance, whatever we want, as long as nobody's getting hit by cars.
I think it's the way that once we know the game called Cross the Street, we can play it silently, singing, dancing at different tempos, in the mood or the darkness or whatever that we're in, with a taught awareness of also what the structure of the game is.
Yeah.
Just to expand on your idea, right? I think that's
absolutely. You can take that to everything in life. Is where's the safety, and then how do we play within the safety?
I think so. And then sometimes, you know, addressing safety is the more you can understand and articulate healthy boundaries, I think healthiness can be co-opted by safety.
Yeah.
And so what feels safe and in bounds for some people isn't safe and in bounds for others.
True.
You know, I grew up with a violent father. So one of my boundaries is I will not play a loud, violent person on stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's other people who come from a loud, violent, everybody yells at everybody culture, and that's how they express love. That's safe for them, and that's an accurate representation of their familial culture or macro culture. So it's important to understand that different people have different cultural orientations.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're willing to be able to share yourself with the people that you're playing with, this is why I do what I do with the story chain thing. That's like to be reminded that we live in a world where different people do things differently, and then to learn to play with different people across borders who do things differently. It helps us not feel completely defeated when, I don't know, leadership of the country turns completely moronic and authoritarian and nationalistic and wants to just put up greater borders.
Well, thank God that'll never happen.
I mean, yeah, we know that's not how people are.
No.
I heard that at the beginning, they were going to call it the Harmonious States of America. And then by a 51-50 vote, it became the United States of America. So that's a joke. Man, we made it almost to the end without getting into the darkness.
Last thing I'd like to ask then is, if you were able to add to the very large corpus of guidance for new parents that are coming online, what would you offer them that is uniquely based on your experience that you think might be helpful?
I think it's natural for whatever part of you is fearful. It's natural for that to exist. The best way for you to deal with that which you're afraid of, which is partially the unknown, is to examine what your relationship is to being fearful and to the unknown. Mm-hmm. Accepting that you have fear, or that there's fear inside of you, and just trusting yourself to listen to your kid, to just breathe and listen to your kid, even the worst screaming, even in colic. Get your hands on the kid and dance. Is there music? Is there, what underscoring does this distressed child need? Is it physical? Is it verbal? Is it visual? Mm-hmm. What does your child need in the state that you find elevating? Also, know that the way you're learning to cope with fear as a parent is going to be a lesson you end up reflecting back to your kid as they experience the fear of growing up. And I introduced my daughter when she was in grade school. She was curious about a children's haunted house, which to an adult is just like, oh, it's a bunch of sheets hung in a way with some surprises, right? Because they're not going to scare kids. But she was very terrified, because sensitive child of creative people and an imagination of everything.
Yeah.
And so I went with her, and she wanted me to carry her through the haunted house for the first time. And that's when I started talking to her about her brain. It's like, your brain is in your head partly to keep you safe. And so I'm very proud of you that you asked me to carry you through this haunted house so you could experience it for the first time. I promise you, when we come back here in first grade, your brain will have learned for 1 year that there's some things here you don't need to be afraid of. And we'll come back and see if that's true. At the same time, your brain will learn new things to be afraid of. that
Yeah.
a year later you won't be afraid of anymore. And every year I used haunted houses and her curiosity about haunted houses conveniently as a metaphor for parenting and life.
Oh, wow.
Part of your job as a parent is to be with them as they walk through the haunted house. And you never know if they're going to ask to be carried, if they're going to want to hold your hand, or if they're going to want to do it themselves. And, the question just becomes, how can you be when you accept what they offer to you? Please carry me, please hold my hand, please let me go. From my point of view, I just wanted to be consistent, because if I'm consistent in the way that I accept her agency and her impulse to ask, then that gives me something different than what my parents gave me, which was consistency, but with different dispositions than that acceptance. So that's a
Yeah.
really long answer to a simple question, but I hope it serves what you're looking for.
It absolutely does. And I think it's a wonderful lesson, which was the consistency based on what they're asking for and being able to provide what they need in that space. When you sort of take a step back from that, it's very much what does my kid need? And what's my role to enable them to achieve that, whatever that is?
Starting with, what does my kid need right now, as
Yes.
I'm thinking about what they need?
Yeah.
What am I showing them as I consider the question with them? What do they need?
Yeah.
What energy am I giving them as they see me listening to them,
Mm-hmm.
even in uncertainty, even in the process of deciding? And if they're looking for an answer from me, am I giving them a should, or am I giving them a could? Am I giving them a you? Am I giving them an I, or am I giving them a we? And really, that's the way we listen to each other when we're doing a two-person, one-act play, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's what's needed here now.
In a lot of ways, brother.
I think that's a perfect place to end this for today.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Joe. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Jeremy. Love talking to you about this stuff, man.